Thanks for joining us again for a Backyard Astronomer interview. I'm here today with Colonel Pat Bledsoe. He is a pilot of the SR-71, commonly known as the Blackbird. Planes aren't necessarily what everybody thinks of when we talk astronomy and space. Oftentimes we're thinking space shuttles, but the SR-71 is essentially the highest that you can fly without being in a space shuttle and essentially wearing a space suit. But that was a little bit further in your career. You were born in Arkansas, right?
That's correct. I was born in a small town called Fordyce, Arkansas.
And was there a moment in your childhood or your upbringing, a moment, a teacher, a class, an event that gave you a passion for flight or space or both?
Well, I got a very early introduction to airplanes because my dad volunteered for the Air Force as soon as World War II started. He kept volunteering for overseas, but finally got an assignment to check out on the B-29 and go to the Far East. But he was about halfway through training when they dropped the atom bomb, and that stopped all training, so he never did make it overseas. Yeah.
So he did a lot of flying, but domestically mostly.
Yeah. We lived in 2 or 3 different bases out west during the war. One of the things I remember about Laredo is when President Roosevelt died. They had a huge memorial service and a flyover that looked like several hundred airplanes. Of course,
wow.
It may have been 40 or 50 coming back multiple times, but it was impressive to me as a 5-year-old.
It was a crystallized moment in your memory.
Yeah. When I graduated from high school, I got a Navy ROTC scholarship and went to the University of New Mexico. After 2 years in that and a midshipman cruise on an aircraft carrier, I decided that the flying looked like fun, but living on a boat was not for me. So I dropped out of college and joined the Air Force as an aviation cadet.
And what was the first plane that you flew in that instance?
It was a T-34.
Okay.
Which was basically a 2-seat tandem version of the early Beechcraft Bonanza. Yeah, so we got, I think, 27 hours in the T-34 and then went right into the T-37, which is a twin-engine jet, and got about 100 hours in that. And then after the T-37 phase, then we went to the T-33, which was the trainer version of the F-80.
Okay.
Which was the U.S.'s first operational jet fighter. You know, it was very competitive because your assignment was, depending on what was available, and then the choice went by class standing. So it was very competitive to try to get this assignment you wanted.
So it is like Top Gun. In the old movie, people are vying to be the best in the class. You're jockeying, yeah.
Right, sure. So I ended up pretty high in the class, and I got a good assignment to be an instructor. But also about that time, we were building up what they call the MAP training. That stood for Mutual Assistance Program, where we were teaching students primarily from third world countries to fly airplanes as part of,
Okay, not primary allies like England or France or...
No, I'm talking about students from Latin America, Africa, the Mideast,
wow,
stuff like that. So they needed more instructors for that. So after just 9 months in the T-37, I had to transition to the T-28, which the Air Force was no longer using for American students at that point.
But we were training somebody else in our prior technology.
Students from Latin America, well over half of them were from Vietnam. We were training students from Vietnam to go back home and defend their country.
Now, did you ever stay in contact with any of those individuals?
I did, yeah. In fact, a very interesting episode with one of them, a kid named Wen Ba Phuc. He was one of the better students, so they gave him an assignment to the Sky Raider, the A-1. Wen had a very unfortunate incident on his very first training mission back in Vietnam with an American instructor. They got shot down. The American instructor was rescued, but Wen was captured by the Viet Cong.
Oh, wow.
Down in the southern part of South Vietnam. Almost exactly a year later, I arrived in Vietnam to be a forward air controller. And and they sent me down to Canto, which was down in the Delta 4 Corps headquarters, to get briefed by the Corps ALO, early liaison officer, and intelligence briefings and all that kind of stuff at the Corps headquarters building. And between briefings, I was standing outside on the veranda drinking a Coke. They had a Coke machine out there. And as I was standing there drinking my Coke, the South Vietnamese Army Jeep drove up with a guy in uniform driving it, and somebody in black pajamas, like you see the pictures of the Viet Cong guerrillas, and barefoot. And they got out, and he wasn't under guard or anything. The two of them got out, and they started walking toward the building.
And you're expecting if he's a Viet Cong guerrilla, he's going to be under guard.
Yeah. And then I realized as they get closer that the guy in the black pajamas was Win.
And had he escaped, or?
He had just escaped that morning.
That's neat.
Yeah.
That's a really neat story, the way the universe brought you guys back together. Now, you mentioned you were a forward air controller. What does that entail?
Okay, forward air controllers were guys who flew small airplanes. In my case, it was the O-1, which is a two-seater Cessna. And your job is to go out and find the enemy and then direct the fighter bombers to come in and attack them. So I got...
You're a scout.
Yeah. I got pretty excited at times,
That plane, a little two-seater Cessna type plane, doesn't have a lot of defense or offense.
No, there was no armor plate, for example, to protect the pilot. All you had to do, only protection you had in that regard was to wear a flak vest, And in my case, I got smart pretty soon and took out the foam rubber seat cushion and replaced that with another folded up flak vest.
Double protection.
Yeah. And as far as armament goes, we had our M16 and a .38 revolver, but there were also 4 2.75-inch rockets that had special warheads on them that produced a lot of smoke. That was for marking the targets.
And people were, of course, gunning for you.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're the one that was aiming for them.
Right. I was there for 11 months altogether. A month off for good behavior. No, actually, I got a month off for flying more than 10 missions over North Vietnam. Well, let me explain first that when I went to Vietnam, it was before the big buildup. And the Air Force was begging for volunteers. So the deal was if you volunteered and completed your tour successfully, you could get your choice of assignments when you got back. I'd always wanted to fly fighters, so I volunteered. Didn't make my wife too happy, but...
Now, this is a model of an SR-71 in front of us. Tell us a little bit about how it's built and the structure of it.
Okay, well, the structure, if you saw it with the external panel removed, is basically, the fuselage is basically a long cylinder with fuel cells in it. And these chine areas, they are called, are added on for two reasons. Number one, the shape blends into the wing, which gives you more lift off the fuselage as well as the wing. And also the chine areas are where the cameras and other sensors were located. Because it's a delta wing airplane, it doesn't have an elevator and ailerons like an airplane with wings and a tail. This has what's called elevons, which are a combination elevator and aileron on the trailing edge of the wings back here, and the rudders move together. At high speed, it basically turns into a turbo ramjet.
And what is a ramjet?
A ramjet is a type of engine that has no moving parts.
There's no spinning, moving parts, really.
It depends on the compressed air at high speed going into the front of the engine, and that combines with the fuel to create something similar to a rocket. A ramjet has to be going about Mach 2 before it'll work.
Are there any other planes that use this same type of technology where it's both in the same unit like that?
There are some experimental types now that are talking about using that, and I'm not sure whether any of them are operational yet.
Wow.
But this was designed, remember, back in the late 50s.
This isn't new technology.
Using slide rules and genius. You know, they didn't have any computer simulations back in those days.
And then you also had the U-2, which was doing a lot of reconnaissance type work.
Yeah, we still got the U-2.
Yeah, it's the only one out of all of them that's still flying. And what did they bring to the table that the U-2 didn't?
They brought to the table very high speed and very high altitude, so made them invulnerable to the surface-to-air missiles. And SR-71 was never hit by a missile.
And this is, again, way before, you know, our cell phones have way more computer technology than what this had in it.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, when the astro-inertial navigation system was developed, it had been initially designed to use on the Skybolt intermediate range ballistic missile. Because of that, it only had to go from one point to one other point, so it had very limited.
The Earth is moving, but we know how long it's going to take, so move from A to B. Right. And okay.
Yeah. So it only had 4 kilobytes of RAM.
Wow.
And the navigation computer for the Skybolts, well, they realized, you know, we got to have more than that. We're not talking about little chips. We're talking about huge, you know, cylinders or drums
processing units.
Yeah. So a major technological breakthrough was developed a 16 RAM computer memory for the SR-71, 16 kilobytes.
That's less than we can even fathom. And anything in today's technology, nothing is that little.
Well, yeah, but you consider that the computer that sent the Apollo spacecraft to the moon and back only had 32 kilobytes of RAM.
And you're doing the rest in your head.
Yeah.
Or you have instruments to analog and manually help you do so.
Well, if you ever saw the movie Apollo 13, you know, when they have the problem and they're up there flipping switches on that's because the computer could only understand machine language, you know, on or off.
Binary.
Yeah.
This is way before GPS or anything.
Yeah, all that stuff, you know.
And so you mentioned the inertial navigation system, the astro-inertial navigation system, ANS, is that right?
Yes.
So where is that located on the plane?
It would be right behind the cockpit, and there's a window right on top here for the star tracking telescope to look through.
So you've got a telescope sitting behind your cockpit,
right,
telling you where to go.
Well, it's up. What it's doing is continuously updating the inertial nav system.
And how does it do that?
By tracking stars, even in the daytime. The nav system uses 32 stars in its catalog, the 32 brightest, you know.
Okay.
Sirius and going down from that. And it has various filters in it. And, of course, it's programmed to ignore planets and the sun and artificial satellites and that kind of stuff.
Which there weren't very many at the time.
Not at the time, no.
And so it picks out Sirius. You're flying at 80,000 feet, and it can pick out a star, even though it's daytime.
It can do it when you taxi out of the hangar, it would lock onto a star just like that.
Even before you're up in altitude.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Assuming it's a clear day.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the only airplane I know that gets maximum range at maximum speed. The faster you go, the more efficient it gets.
Interesting.
For example, I looked this up in the performance charts one day. At 80,000 feet at average weight, at Mach 3.2, you're getting about 55 nautical miles per 1,000 pounds of fuel.
Holy cow.
If you have a malfunction and have to go home subsonic, say at 0.9 at 30,000 feet, you're only getting about 30 nautical miles per 1,000.
You better find a place to land.
Yeah, exactly. So there were a few missions where if we couldn't go max speed, we couldn't make it. Didn't have the range.
And what kind of range are we talking?
We're talking roughly 2,500 to 3,000 miles between refuelings.
And what's the longest mission you've done, including refuelings?
The longest mission I flew was from the U.S. to the Mideast and back during the Yom Kippur War in 1973. The nose was completely interchangeable. You could have radar or an optical bar camera. The whole nose would.
So depending on the mission requirements, they would swap that out beforehand.
The optical bar camera was an interesting camera. It had a rotating lens, and it would photograph horizon to horizon on every sweep. And you could photo map roughly 100,000 square miles in an hour with that camera.
And so there was testing. There was live theater of operations missions over Vietnam, over the Middle East, over
Various other places.
other areas around the world.
Yeah.
But you also got to test and have some fun yourself. You were able to take this plane on a closed loop course. Is that what it's called?
Oh, yeah. Well, back in 1976, Senator Goldwater, you remember him,
Prescott loves him.
was a big supporter of the Air Force, and he was pressuring the Air Force to do something spectacular to help celebrate the bicentennial. And the first thought was, let's do around the world, nonstop, and see how fast we can do it.
And you've got the capabilities with enough refuelings.
Yeah, that was the key, with enough refuel. Well, the plan was to take off from Beale Air Force Base, head west, just before sunset, and gradually catch the sun as you went around, so that you fly the whole mission in daylight.
Now, okay, let's talk about that for just a second. You can beat the sun.
Yeah, because if in rough figures, the sun moves over the surface of the earth at about 1,000 miles an hour.
And you're able to double that.
And we can go twice as fast as that. Yeah, so we could take off, say, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and get back to Beale Air Force Base after going around the world at about 10 o'clock the next morning, in daylight the whole time.
And so they're planning this hypothetical mission
Right.
to take off at sunset and beat the sun home on the other side.
Yeah. And, yeah, it was planned for 16 hours and 20 minutes. The problem was it was going to take almost our entire fleet of specialized tankers that we had for the SR-71 to deploy them around the world to various spots to do the mission and get the tankers back home. It was going to take roughly 100 total sorties of KC-135s.
And some of these could be over areas that are still disputed, or you're going to have a unique route, but you don't want to
more or less follow the equator.
Okay.
Yeah, avoiding.
You don't want to monopolize all of your equipment.
So, Strategic Air Command thought it was a great plan. Man, it'll show our global reach, and so forth. Headquarters Air Force didn't think so much of it. It's ridiculous to use that many tanker sorties for one flight. Come up with something cheaper. So we did. And the alternate plan was to set the straight line speed record, the sustained altitude record, and the closed course speed record. And the U.S. already held the straight line speed record and the altitude record. Had been set by the YF-12, which was the prototype interceptor version of the same airplane.
Okay.
Several years earlier. But the Russians held the closed course speed record. And I was the senior pilot of the guys who were going to fly these missions, so I got to choose which one. I said, I want the closed course record because that's the one the Russians held.
You want to take that?
Yeah. And their record at the time was roughly 1,850 miles an hour, something like that. So we managed to break it with a handy margin, 2,092 miles an hour for a 1,000-kilometer closed course.
And where was that course?
It started and ended over Edwards Air Force Base, but it was roughly teardrop shape out to the east. In fact, it came fairly close to Prescott and Kingman.
Flying right over northern Arizona.
Yeah, on the turn. It was a constant 45-degree bank around the turn. And the rules for setting records like that say you can't descend to gain airspeed. You got to hold a constant altitude or climb. So it was easier to climb, so that's what we did.
You climbed.
We climbed all the way around the course.
And you did 1,000 kilometers.
Yeah.
at a
At an
2,092.
average speed of 2,092 miles an hour. Yeah.
What do you see at 87,000 feet? What does your view look like?
Well, anytime you're above about 60,000 feet, you can actually see the curvature of the Earth. But the higher you go, the darker the sky gets.
So you're looking at the blackness of space.
Well, more or less, but you're looking, you're not looking directly up unless you're in a turn. You can look up, but yeah.
And you can see the curve of the Earth
You can see
around you.
You can see the curvature of the Earth. So,
What's the distance that you can see on the ground at that point?
I would guess somewhere between 400 and 500 miles.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that a spiritual moment, to take all that in? I'm sure in the moment you're not thinking about that.
Sort of. Yeah.
You're thinking I gotta let off.
Flying the airplane, but I think the first time it really hit me about how fast we were really going was when I think it was just on a training mission out of Beale Air Force Base at night, and we're heading out over the Pacific after sunset, and I'm watching the sun rise in the west at about the same speed it normally comes up in the east, and all of a sudden it hit me, we are really going fast.
Doing something no human's ever done really at that point, and still has it.
Except astronauts.
Astronauts, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so when it sinks in how fast you're really going, yeah. But, you don't, excuse me, you don't normally get a sensation of speed up there like you would, say, at 100 feet.
You don't have the reference point of the ground flying by you.
Yeah. Also lucky one day, also on a training mission out of Beale, heading down the coast, and you could actually see the Terminator moving over the surface of the Earth.
The dark and the light.
The difference between the dark on the east side and light on the west side.
Wow.
That's an impressive sight, too.